Hey, I'm Nicole Ferraro, a contributing editor at Light Reading. Welcome to What's the Story, a short podcast where we take a step back from the most significant topics in telecom to tell you the latest news, how we got here, what it all means, and what to expect next. This week on the show, we're talking with Light Reading's editor-in-chief, Phil Harvey, about the latest news surrounding the fate of the video-sharing social network, TikTok. Phil recently reported that the Chinese government has released a new set of export license requirements aimed at slowing down ByteDance's ability to sell TikTok to a U.S. company. He's here to tell us more about what's going on with TikTok, what it all means, why it matters, and what's likely to happen next. Hi, Phil. Welcome back to the show.
Hi. How's it going?
It's going great. How is it going with you?
Not too bad. Busy today, but yeah. That's the way it is.
Yeah, it's the way it is. So it's great to have you. Today, we're going to be talking about TikTok. So just to start off, what's the story with TikTok? Can you give us some background on what's been going on here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I want to start by saying that TikTok is always bigger than I think it is. Everybody talks about it as like obviously it's a very popular social media network, kind of mostly based around video sharing. But I didn't realize until I was checking with the company recently that they have like 100 million users in the U.S. So an awful lot of people are TikTok users. And then according to the New York Times story that they ran very recently, but they had some data that they obtained from a TikTok employee, unnamed source, but they were saying that about 49 million people in the US use TikTok daily. And out of those people, about a third of them are 14 years or younger. 14 years old or younger. So it's a massively popular platform, but massively popular with kids, teenagers especially. And so anyway, that's what's happening with them lately. Is that the Chinese government released some new export license requirements and said, listen, if you transfer any computer code that allows for these things, and it included things like voice recognition, text analysis, and some other things that you would use to make up an AI system, you had to get a special license for that. And as I was reading, some reporting in the Wall Street Journal and also some quotes from China's official news agency, a government-based news agency, but what essentially they were saying is this is aimed at the technology that ByteDance, which is TikTok's parent company, that TikTok uses to do things like predictive analytics to see like what types of videos you would like, and that sort of thing. So they're essentially putting these new rules in place to slow down the transfer of any technology out of China, where ByteDance is based, to any other U.S. company. That matters because obviously TikTok is in negotiations or talks with several U.S. companies to sell its U.S. operations. The reason that's happening, and now I got to unpack this whole thing, but the reason that's happening is because the Trump administration back on August 6th put out an order. Trump put out an executive order that said the company had to sell its U.S. operations or it was going to be banned from operating in the U.S. The reason he gave was very similar to what he said about Huawei, which is that this company, that Chinese companies are subject to the Chinese Communist Party, and they would be unable to refuse any sort of order that commanded them to hand over data on government officials or U.S. citizens, for espionage purposes and that sort of thing. So it's couched as a security measure, an extreme security measure to protect U.S. citizens from, from a foreign power, basically.
Right. So with these new Chinese export rules, what like what broader implications do you think that they're going to have on both these TikTok buyers or potential buyers, as well as the industry at large? This is part of a bigger political fight. So
Right. Yeah. That's kind of the part I wanted to get into was that,
yeah.
so obviously a lot of companies have been involved in talking to TikTok as, this is the reason I started out by talking about how big they are and how um, popular they are is because it's a really desirable company. There are a lot of companies out there, Walmart, Oracle, Microsoft, Twitter, all kinds of companies have been linked to talks with TikTok. And as soon as this thing happened, and this, like I said, this started in earlier this month. So we haven't even been 30 days within it. And it's going to wrap up pretty soon too, because I think the executive order gave them 45 days to find a buyer or to be shut down. Telcos have tons of user data. But they've abused the relationship between themselves and their consumers over the years, but not to the degree that social networks have. Mm-hmm. So, as much as I think Trump is doing this as a political one-upmanship, in his sort of ongoing trade war with China, it is worth noting that social media companies tend to collect way too much data under way too vague terms. Mm-hmm. And, if you go on light reading, for anybody listening to this, look at the reporting of Robert Clark, who's our correspondent in Hong Kong. Patty Belton and Fiona Graham have both covered this for us in the UK. And so I'm borrowing from a lot of their reporting, but they've been covering this TikTok saga, since this stuff started kicking off. And, the implications are that, this is the Trump administration targeting a social network, which, like I said, it's an interesting place to start. I never really get upset about somebody cracking down on a social network and saying, yeah. Hey, you need to be careful about how you use data, because as we've seen with Facebook, it's obviously a problem. However, this, if you look at TikTok, WeChat, which was also named in a separate executive order, Huawei, ZTE, China Telecom's U.S. operations. We're seeing this kind of pattern with the Trump administration and with China that any company, that wants to do business, you can't just do business in the U.S. and let that be that. It's going to get political, and you have to kind of be prepared for that. Mm-hmm. For companies in the telco industry and in the now, I guess, in the broader internet company, tech industry, and media industry, you have to expect that at some point China is going to retaliate. Mm-hmm. If we look at what happened last year with Houston Rockets manager Daryl Morey, he tweeted his support of pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. And right. China immediately punished the NBA by suspending broadcast of their games, sales of merchandise. They really hit them in the pocketbook as quickly and as hard as they could. And that's just like one example of like how touchy these governments are going to be, with the way companies behave and carry on and that sort of thing. Yeah. And so in this case, it relates to the telecom industry, because even though TikTok is not a telecom company, and it tells you this, in their when they sued the Trump administration to address the executive order, in their suit, they took issue with the fact that he classified them as the same in the same way that he did Huawei as like critical telecom infrastructure. They're saying we're not that, we're something completely different. It still is going to cause firms to sit up and take notice, because whether you're critical telecom infrastructure or you're a data company, that's using AI and, showing videos, there's still, if you're a foreign linked service or company of any sort, you could indeed fall under this umbrella of companies targeted by the Trump administration in this trade war with China.
Yeah. So how do you expect things to play out? What are some stories you're going to be keeping an eye out for in the coming weeks as far as all this goes?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's hard to predict, of course, because we are dealing with the Trump administration.
New nightmares every day.
Every day. It's always something new and interesting that we couldn't have possibly predicted.
It's like the more diplomatic way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying. I'm really trying. The other part of this, is that so obviously there's a time clock here. So unlike a lot of stories in the Trump news cycle, it isn't just going to kind of go away and never be talked about again. Like so many promises and things like that. He's actually given the Commerce Department, the Treasury Department, and everybody else some sort of deadline here that they have to accomplish something. They either have to beat him in court or find a buyer or get the hell out of the U.S. completely, which is hardly likely. The company has 1,500 employees. They had plans on paper, so they say, to hire up to 10. They were going to employ like 10,000 people eventually because of how fast they're growing and how many businesses they were going to get into. They might be fudging a bit on that. I think that's aggressive. But let's take a number between 1,500 and 10,000 and say they were probably going to employ a lot of people at some point. And so, and like I said, they're growing like a weed, tons and tons of minutes every day. People are on that platform. So the implication for the telecom industry, they're very quickly becoming a source of traffic and a very visible presence on telecom networks. We had a story that we ran from Mike Dano not too long ago about Verizon engineers kind of grousing that TikTok video traffic was suddenly like one of the heaviest things on their network. So this is becoming a thing for U.S. telecom companies, and so we'll be watching that. We'll be watching the companies whether it changes ownership. We'll be watching whether it comes to some sort of agreement with the Trump administration and how that factors in. What we have. The lesson that we kind of have seen so far is that when companies push back, against the Trump administration in some ways, it doesn't tend to go well. If we look at what happened with Huawei, so not only did they get locked out of U.S. 5G networks, but things have been constantly escalating, and now the U.S. and China are kind of battling around Huawei globally. And the US is trying to get other countries to kick Huawei out of their networks. And, Huawei's business is accelerating in some ways, but is in real threat in other ways because of the US putting limits on the kind of technology that they can export and use in their products. So weirdly enough, this stuff kind of, because it's political, it all kind of gets tangled up together. The U.S. and China, or the Trump administration, I should say, and China are in what looks to be a perpetual trade war. And any company that gets sort of singled out, whether it has anything to do with telecom or not, is eventually going to be either treated like Huawei, or they're going to use, sort of what's happening with Huawei as like a blueprint. To either go after it or to deal with it long term. And like I said before, if you're a U.S. company and you're operating in China, at some point you have to expect that the government's going to retaliate, because this is clearly stepped outside the realm of telecom and infrastructure. And I should just point out too that nearly every U.S. consumer has a shelf full of electronics that were produced in China and phones that are in their pocket that were produced in China. So it's odd that that none of these things have been addressed yet, but at some point maybe they will be, and that's kind of something else that we'll be keeping an eye on.
Awesome. You want to drop your TikTok handle before we go?
I don't have one yet. I just all that I know about TikTok, I read on my daily newspaper that shows up on my door. Yeah,
that's where you're supposed to get.
So
your
I go out and get the
TikTok.
paper and I yell at the kids to get off my lawn. Get off my lawn! I'm going to read about the TikTok.
Perfect. You're doing it exactly right. Thank you so much, Phil. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you so much, Phil Harvey, for taking the time to talk TikTok with me today. Thank you as well to our producer, Pierre Landrio, for making this episode, and thank you all for listening. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review, share this episode with a colleague or friend, and subscribe to the Light Reading Podcast for more interviews and insights from the team. That's the story for now. We'll be back next week.